it is crucial to have a significant amount of Mozart taking place in Luhansk and Donetsk, which are localities in which fighting has never ceased. After suffering defeat in a number of regions within the Donetsk Oblast at the beginning of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the Russian army has focused its attention on Luhansk oblast. As a consequence of this factor, fighting has become more intense in Luhansk over the past few days. However, the Russian military has not yet accomplished what it set out to do in this particular region. In the region of Luhansk, the Ukrainian army is making history against the Russian invaders, who are quickly losing both personnel and equipment as they fight to maintain their presence. A successful operation was carried out by the Ukrainian army in the city of Kreminna, which is located in the northern portion of the Luhansk Oblast region, the other day. The BMPT Terminator, which the Russian occupiers described as being impossible to destroy and a miracle weapon, served as the objective of the separation. Since the beginning of the war, there is official documentation of an important vehicle being destroyed by an explosion for the very first time. Let's examine this event, which the Russian occupiers had no way of anticipating, what suffered a significant loss as a result of it, and what the subsequent developments were. In the areas of active conflict, the situation in Luhansk has become increasingly tense in recent days. The Russian aggressors have launched multiple attacks in their quest to take control of Luhansk Oblast. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army was able to thwart almost all of these assaults and drive the Russian occupants out of the region through a series of control attacks. In a statement regarding the recent events in the area, Sergei Haidai, the Adopt the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, said the following: "The invaders retreated because they needed to replenish their units after they had been sufficiently fragmented due to the fact that they had been sufficiently weakened. They went as far as attempting to flee with an entire column of equipment, but when they got a positive response from our defenders, they retreated as well." It is believed that Ukrainian drones were able to record the Russian invaders' losses of many soldiers and pieces of equipment during the battle for Luhansk Gold and Field Edge. On the snow-covered road, the BMPT Terminator vehicle used by the Russian invaders can be seen in the process of being destroyed after being blown up. The BMPT was the target of artillery fire from the Ukrainian army. The video demonstrates without a doubt that the BPTT took a direct hit, which was followed by a violent explosion, and then immediately caught fire. The Russian military, which has suffered the loss of approximately 3,500 tanks since the conflict began, has now suffered the loss of its BMPT Terminator vehicle for the first time. Everyone is aware of how significant this vehicle is to both the war and its outcome. Even if Russia were to lose just one Bradley main battle tank, BMPT, it would be a major setback for them because these vehicles are used as a shield in ground operations and have a variety of functions, one of which is to protect tank convoys. Since the beginning of the conflict, the Ukrainian army is said to have been responsible for the destruction of nearly 9,000 vehicles belonging to the Russian military. The BMPT was not included on the list of vehicles that were destroyed, which included over. This is due to the fact that the Russian military doesn't have very many of these vehicles. BMPs feature extremely potent heavy armor and come armed with rocket launchers, grenade launchers, machine guns, and anti-tank guns among other weapons. These vehicles are frequently employed in the role of providing protection for tank cowboys. After the operation, the Ukrainian army, which was responsible for destroying the tanks that the Russian invaders were using, added the BMPT to the list of vehicles that were destroyed. Grab dinner. The majority of the weapons employed by the Russian occupiers against the Ukrainian army date back to the Soviet era. These weapons are not sufficient to combat the Ukrainian army, which is getting stronger thanks to the assistance of Western and European nations. The Russian military is unsuccessful in every attempt it makes to use the few new pieces of equipment it has against Ukraine. This is due to the fact that the Ukrainian army has access to new Ukrainian intelligence as well as intelligence from the United States, which enables them to know where the Russian occupiers have stationed almost all of their equipment. The United States of America have followed virtually every move made by the Russian invaders. A very powerful piece of equipment was also lost by the Russian invaders the day before near Chelburg, a settlement in the Kherson region. In the same manner as the BMPT, this piece of machinery was ruined for the very first time. One by one, the Ukrainian military is currently detonating all of the Russian occupiers' brand new military hardware. Let's examine the information we have about this piece of equipment, as well as the specifics of its demise. The anti-aircraft missile system known as the Tor M2DT used by the Russian invaders has been destroyed by the Ukrainian army. Cameras mounted on unmanned aerial vehicles were able to record every aspect of this mission in its entirety. The video evidence reveals that the Russian aggressor's Tor M2DT anti-aircraft missile system was taken out by a single bullet during the invasion. During this assault, members of the Ukrainian army used missiles of the M982X caliber. The Ukrainian army's arsenal now includes this particular type of missile. That the United States of America's assistance to Ukraine, in the form of a high-precision guided missile called Excalibur, was responsible for the Russian invaders' most important anti-aircraft system capabilities. Russian soldiers can be seen in the video that was shared by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. They are seen approaching a DT anti-aircraft missile system that is on fire after the attack to put out the fire caused by the Tornhim. The Russian soldiers, holding fire extinguishers in their hands, are attempting to put out the flames that are coming from the anti-aircraft system. The inexperience of the Russian soldiers is demonstrated once more by their behavior in this instance. The second missile launched by the Ukrainian army kills Russian soldiers who are trying to put out the fire. The video of the attack was published on the website of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, which also included the following text: an M2DT for the Arctic tour. When it was delivered to Ukraine, a Russian air defense system became an instant hit on Russian television, but it wasn't long before a Ukrainian drone showed it off to the Ukrainian gunners. It burned with a strong intensity. The fire extinguisher was of no use in putting out the blaze. Tor M2DT, the anti-aircraft missile system, was an essential piece of gear that could be used in a variety of different environments, including muddy, snowy, and rough terrain. Within a week, the Russian army had lost very significant amounts of equipment. The Russian army, which has been using Soviet narrative equipment since the beginning of the war, lost any of its modern equipment as soon as it put it on the field of battle. The Russian invaders suffered more casualties than just those listed here. The casualties suffered by the Russian army up until February 17, just a few days before the start of the first year of the war, were followed by 141,260 rupees members of the armed forces, 3,298 tanks, 6,520 armored combat vehicles, 2,322 pieces of artillery support, 467 reactive spread fire systems, 241 air defense systems, 298 aircraft, 287 helicopters, 5,187 pieces of automotive and tank equipment combined. Equipment: 18 military ships and boats, 8 other types of tests, 71 cruise missiles, 1,314 unmanned aerial vehicles, 221 special machines, and 4 operational tactical missile systems. On February 24, Russian President Vladimir Putin began an invasion of Ukraine, and he did not even remotely anticipate that it would result in so many casualties over the following days. Putin had the misguided belief that Ukrainian leader Zelensky would relent in a matter of weeks, allowing him to accomplish his goals. However, the truth was in a totally different place. Zelensky led an outstanding resistance against the Russian invaders by uniting his army and his people in the fight against the Russians. The Russian invaders were taken aback when they encountered an unexpected battle. On the other hand, the Ukrainian armies, buoyed by the support of countries in the West and Europe, shifted from a defensive position to an offensive position. The Russian army was pressured into withdrawing from the majority of the occupied territories. The confidence of both the Russian people and Putin has been shaken as a result of all of these developments. From the very beginning, the invasion of Ukraine did not have the backing of the Russian people. But as a result of the sanctions imposed by countries in the West and Europe, the Russian people have lost their patience with the government. The Russian army is losing hundreds of soldiers every single day. People started taking to the streets and organizing protests against Putin in response to his policies. The Ukrainian army was successful in getting Russian soldiers to surrender. Protests were organized by young people in Russia in an effort to avoid serving in the military. Putin was forced into a corner as a result of all of these developments. Putin, whose isolation deepens with each passing day, is now powerless because he has exhausted all of his options. Even Russian politicians and military commanders have begun to voice their disapproval of Putin. The situation for Putin is hopeless at this point. Do you believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin will relinquish control of the occupied territory? How should one judge the actions of the Ukrainian army in destroying very important pieces of equipment that belonged to the Russian invaders? What are your impressions of the way the war has been going so far? Please enlighten us with your thoughts. Keep up with us to receive further updates. A fire has broken out in Crimea. The pro-Russian oligarchs have taken a significant hit as a result of Ukraine's actions. In an effort to give strategic points, we bombarded them. Red alert was issued by the Kremlin. The Ukrainian government is exerting every effort to seize control of Crimea. Crimea is currently experiencing a severe crisis as a direct result of this most recent move. Crimea, which is one of the most important regions in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, has recently been experiencing a string of major setbacks. The obstinacy of the Ukrainian government regarding Crimea has recently begun to resurface. The assertion made by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky that Crimea is a part of Ukraine was brought up once more. In a separate declaration, Zelensky emphasized that the war would not be over until Crimea was retaken. These assertions are presented as the rationale for carrying out such a significant operation. After this most recent explosion, Russia no longer possesses any strength in Crimea. In one of the first minutes that we had been working at our new headquarters that the Russians had established while taking advantage of Crimea's central location, a fire broke out. This outpost was situated in Sevastopol, which shares a border with Ukraine and is located in close proximity to the country. An unexplained fire broke out in the south quarters, which is very significant for us because it helps us maintain a large number of soldiers and a large amount of ammunition. The Kremlin issued a red alert because they were aware of how significant the repercussions of this fire would be. There were approximately 185 people who were exposed to the fire, but the overall impact on the war will be significantly greater than these numbers. Nearly all of Russia's long-range missiles have been launched from the corridors of this military house in recent years. Putin characterized this part of Crimea as being very secure. Because it was a no-fight zone, various kinds of munitions could be stored there safely. Russia is now considered to have lost one of its strategic points because it has been placed on the list of dangerous countries. It is also interesting to note that this fire started in an area where Russia was stopping grain ships sailing from Odessa to Africa. This fact adds another layer of intrigue to the situation. And the news agency that had been established by Russia immediately began its efforts to cover up Ukraine's successful operations. The agency stated that it was unlikely that Ukraine would organize an operation because the fire was caused by an electrical leak and that it was highly unlikely that Ukraine would organize an operation. Many broadcasters, who track each stage of the war in real time, put an end to the statement almost immediately after it was made. Russia believes that it can achieve the advantage that it was unable to achieve during the heated conflict by gaining the advantage that can be gained from the statements of such agencies. However, these most recent occurrences have once again demonstrated how meaningless the statements made by the agencies that Russia has established are. In particular, the statements made by Ukraine's former Deputy Minister of Defense are being brought up again in this discussion. The Deputy Minister had previously stated, prior to his resignation, that it was only a matter of time before Crimea was taken over. In a nutshell, these statements indicate that Ukraine has insinuated to the rest of the world that it may suddenly move against Crimea, which is something that it has not explicitly done. It is generally agreed that this blaze marked the beginning of Ukraine's move to retake control of Crimea. But Russia is dealing with a much more serious issue than this. There is a sizable population of Crimean Turks living in Crimea, which is now completely contained within the borders of Russia. This population has the potential to support Turkey throughout all historical eras. Do you think it's a coincidence that the fire started right after a Turkish merchant ship had to be docked for repairs? Is it possible that the fire group that was formed by Crimeans among themselves had a hand in these activities? If it is a coincidence, then yes. It is common knowledge that Russia does not provide a welcoming environment for the ethnic and religious minorities who live within its borders. Consequently, it is not surprising that some of these people would participate in illegal activities. However, the fire is not only affecting Crimea, it is also beginning to show up inside Russia all throughout the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The conflict has always been interpreted differently by each of the parties involved. The fact that Ukraine has avoided causing harm to civilians since the start of this conflict is something that has garnered praise from people all over the world. As a result, it is possible that the Ukrainians are responsible for starting these fires. This is due to the fact that the Ukrainian army has generally targeted the shops and workplaces of the pro-Russians, which represents their material assets. However, Russia made its intentions clear to us by bombing a number of locations in Kiev. The blaze that broke out in the Russian capital shared many of the same characteristics. It is believed that Ukraine was responsible for starting a fire in Moscow at 6:69 a.m. local time. This fire was responsible for significant damage to one of the largest shopping centers in Moscow. Once more, the perspective from which the Ukrainian army sees the war was made clear by the fact that this fire was started at 6 a.m., an hour in which civilians would not be at risk of being harmed. This fire caused significant damage to the businesses that were owned by wealthy oligarchs who were known to support Russia. And this was just the first blow delivered to the Russian oligarchs in a series of blows. Allegedly not long after that, Ukrainian agents carried out similar operations again, this time in St. Petersburg. These attacks, which do not target civilians, cause serious damage to the Russian oligarchs and will financially support the Russian army. Because the fires could not be extinguished for a long time despite all of the interventions, one wonders what is stored there. However, the official authorities always avoid making a statement about this. It is believed that this warehouse belonged to the mercenary company known as Drive There, which has a significant involvement in the Russian armed forces. According to the allegations, Wagner stole weapons from the Russian army on a very serious level. Wagner is also the subject of the allegations. It was said that he stored his weapons in a number of warehouses similar to this warehouse, despite the fact that the weapons in question date back to the Soviet period. What a dishonest act this is. The fact that the army is facing a very serious shortage of weapons has the potential to completely transform demonstrations. The perspective of Wagner immediately following the presentation of this allegation. Another extremely serious issue started to become apparent. According to the allegations, Yevgeny Prigozhin strongly suggested that Sergei Zrovin should take over as commander of Ukraine. Because of this, Prigozhin had quick and easy access to weapons. Naturally, upon becoming aware of this fact, Putin acted hastily to make a decision and fired Sergei Serowakian. A rift between Wagner and Putin may have been caused by this development. War analysts believe that Prigozhin is a man who is capable of inflicting at least as much damage on Russia as Putin. The fact that he can see himself in the mirror. A rivalry, in which Putin is pitted against an equal and opponent, could cause serious problems for Putin at a time when Putin has lost so much trust. On the other hand, Putin's friendship with Wagner goes back much further in time. It is not a coincidence that Wagner is being referenced in this conflict by Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to a large number of sources, Wagner was created by the composer himself. The fact that Yevgeny Prigozhin, also known as Putin's cook, has received an investment worth millions of rubles since Vladimir Putin came to power provides the justification for this action. In other words, the financial resources that made it possible for Wagner to be founded were, in a sense, taxes taken out of the pockets of the general population. It is unknown how exactly Prigozhin, who was initially in charge of arranging supplies for the Russian army, arrived at this point. However, it is well known that the concept was extremely important to the conflict in Ukraine. Allegedly, Prigozhin is interested in acquiring a very serious investment opportunity in the most remote part of Ukraine, and he plans to do so by utilizing this crucial significance. It is common knowledge that Dartmouth possesses a significant quantity of natural resources, and these natural resources are the primary commodities that Russia seeks from that region. But Ukraine's significant resistance to moving forwards in any direction is preventing this from taking place. But for Putin, seizing this region is almost as important as capturing the rest of Crimea, and despite the fact that the Ukrainian army is defending it in a very serious way, Putin is not giving up. Despite the fact that he has lost thousands of troops in this region, he refuses to stop sending more troops there. It is estimated that Prigozhin has a significant amount of influence in this matter. The fact that he is able to exert such a significant amount of influence demonstrates that Putin is not effectively managing Russia. On the other hand, a large part of your success can be attributed to sound administration. According to analysts of the conflict, there is only one thing that can stop Ukraine from winning all of the victories it is capable of, and that is for the country to gather all of the resources it requires. As soon as the Ukrainian army has acquired all of these materials and equipment, they will expel the Russian forces that are currently occupying Ukrainian territory from the country. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is still going strong. Every new turn of events on the battlefield and in occupied territory makes it more difficult to predict the outcome of the war. But what exactly is going on outside of the conflict zones? There are a lot of developments taking place on site, just like there are developments taking place in the war zones. Particularly, a person who has recent experience serving on the front lines witnessed it. What came to pass? And what that resigned says can sway the opinions of everyone. A significant truth was unearthed in a recent statement, and the implications of this truth have been felt throughout the entire Russian armed forces. In addition to this, a great number of Russian soldiers have come forward with their confessions. Let's discuss and evaluate these confessions and reveals together, shall we? Andrei Medvedev, who was the commander of the Wagner Group, a private company, and resigned in July of 2022 due to the injustice and corruption in the company. Medvedev, who fled Russia and made a request for asylum in Norway in January 2023, is currently living in Norway under the protection of the country's security agencies. He recently made some very striking statements against the Wagner Group in an interview with an American broadcasting organization. These statements challenged the beliefs of everyone. Medvedev discussed the extrajudicial execution of individuals who had refused to fight for Ukraine. According to him, the group had a policy of executing anyone who did not want to fight, including soldiers who did not want to serve their country. were murdered right in front of everybody's eyes by being shot and killed. The dead bodies of the soldiers were then thrown in graves in a callous manner. He continued by stating that such punishments were standard procedure. Before Medvedev's statement, there had been reports from soldiers who had either surrendered to the Ukrainian army, left the front line, or been taken prisoner. These reports were similar to what Medvedev mentioned. Accordingly, the ruthless behavior of the Wagner group suggests that this is how Russia is trying to solve its personnel shortages and desertions, as well as the soldiers who had surrendered to the Ukrainian army and the losses they have suffered. In addition, this may also be how Russia is trying to solve the problem of the soldiers who had surrendered to the Ukrainian army. In the territories currently under occupation. Recently, Ukrainian intelligence agencies were able to obtain a recording of a phone conversation that took place between a Russian soldier serving in Ukraine and his girlfriend. During this discussion, the Russian soldier identified as Sergei discussed the instruction that had been given to the army. The order that Sergei gave was heartless and inhumane. According to Sergei, the instruction was to kill hundreds of innocent bystanders. After that, he told his girlfriend what he had discovered, he said. They warned us that there were a lot of civilians wandering around the area where we were going, and then they gave us orders to kill them. Everyone we saw. The Ukrainian intelligence service managed to listen in on an average of 22 phone conversations. It is abundantly clear from these conversations that the soldiers did not appreciate the orders that were being given or the practices that were being followed. Already struggling with a significant lack of available personnel is the Russian armed forces. However, even the soldiers who are already serving in the army do not wish to fight and be there. Nearly every one of the soldiers who are being held there against their will is looking for a way to make their escape. One of the conversations that were intercepted by the enemy revealed that I had a commander who had shot himself in the leg in order to flee the area. According to the caller, the Russian air assault soldier explained everything to them. This lends credence to a report that was published in the media within the past few months claiming that soldiers in the army are becoming injured. It would appear that they developed in order to retreat from the battlefront. Soldiers often resort to self-inflicted wounds as a means of evading capture by the military. The soldiers, who are looking for ways to get away from their captors, have another option available to them: they can surrender to the Ukrainian troops. The army, which does not hesitate to try anything in order to get away from the front line, is steadily losing its chances of winning the conflict with Ukraine. The agenda includes not only those individuals who wish to flee the army but also the statements made by those individuals who have already fled the army. The Russian military is said to have horrific policies and orders, according to former frontline soldiers who have spoken out about them. One of the people trying to escape from the Russian occupiers travels through Belarus and Kazakhstan on their way to Europe. Nikita Chippering, who was a member of the 64th Separate Guard Motorized Rifle Brigade, is another brave individual who has spoken out about the atrocities that occurred in the army. Both maniacs who took pleasure in killing people and rappers were present at the scene. Chevron begins by referring to the soldiers who serve in the army and then moves on to discuss the loading that is done by the Russian occupiers. He has admitted that the invaders broke into the homes of civilians in Ukraine, stole almost all of the valuable items, and then sold them in Belarus. Pavel Falatio, a Russian paratrooper commando who formerly served in the army but was forced to leave the military after suffering an injury to his eye, caused a lot of commotion with the publication of his 141-page book. In his book, he detailed all of the inhumane orders and actions that were carried out by the Russian army. Filatov became the voice of all the soldiers who were looking for a chance to escape from the front and who were unable to openly express their thoughts despite having escaped the front. When asked why he decided to write the book, Filatov responded, "I'm not afraid to fight in the war, but I need to feel justice in order to realize that what I'm doing is right, and I believe that all of this is failing not only because the government is stealing." This was his explanation for why he decided to write the book. Everything. But if we Russians don't believe that what we've been doing is right, then there's no reason for this war to continue. And the whole time I was thinking, God, if I make it out of this alive, I swear to you that I will do everything that is in my power to put an end to this. This book served as a reflection of the thoughts of Russian soldiers who did not see the point in continuing to fight Ukrainian forces. In his open and honest account, Filatov detailed nearly everything he went through while serving in the army. In addition to that, he discussed some of the challenges that the soldiers were up against. He claimed that the higher-ups in the Russian army ignored all of the difficulties that the troops were having to deal with. Despite the appealing situation presented by the Russian army authorities, Filatov wrote that during his time in the army he was only allowed one shower every 2 months and went without bread for 1.5 months. Never intervened. With each vote that he cast, Bilateria showed that he was telling the truth. One of these facts was his commentary on the various pieces of apparatus. It was brought up a number of times that Russia's military hardware is being routinely destroyed by Ukraine, and that this hardware has not been replaced since the days of the Soviet Union in Russia. According to the statement made by Filatov, this inadequacy was compensated for by Russia's distribution of weapons to the soldiers serving in the army. It was already common knowledge that the equipment in question was unsuitable for use against Ukraine. However, according to Filatov, the durability of these weapons was non-existent. Rust and broken straps were already present on the weapons when they were given to the soldiers. The reputation of the Russian army was coming under increasing attack as a result of all of these explanations. There was a report that contained statements made by soldiers who were known to have deserted from the Russian army or surrendered to the Ukrainian army. These statements were included in the report. The following is a statement that was allegedly made by one of the fleeing soldiers, according to a statement that was included in this report. I, Daniel Andreevich Fraukin, as a member of the military unit 5146L Guard Corps, have confessed to all of the crimes that I committed in Andreeva, including shooting civilians, stealing from civilians, and taking their phones from them, our fighters, as well as all of the infantry that was fighting on the front line. This admission made by the Russian soldier was considered to be an official confession. Putin was aware of the negative developments in the army as well as the statements of the soldiers who had either fled the front line or surrendered to the opposing troops, but he did not want to ignore them. When Putin's army is short on soldiers to fight for his invasion plans, he sends mercenaries from the Wagner group, soldiers from Kadyrov's church, and soldiers from other armies to the front. Putin is unable to find soldiers to fight for his invasion plans. When Putin's army is low on personnel, he fills it with ill-trained and vicious soldiers from the local population. As a result, Russia is placed in an even more hopeless position in its conflict with Ukraine. The fact that Putin allows this to happen demonstrates the lengths to which he will go in order to protect his reputation, and the Wagner Group's admissions confirm just how ruthless a company it is in its business practices. In recent days, the United States government has made it official that the Wagner Group, which has ties to the Kremlin and is led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, one of Vladimir Putin's closest friends, has been designated as an international criminal organization. The majority of people believe that Vladimir Putin and everyone else who supports him are in the wrong, and that the invasion attacks that are being launched make no sense. As a direct consequence of the statements made by ex-soldiers during the conflict, Russia's reputation has suffered such a severe blow that the country will continue to struggle even after the conflict has ended. In light of this, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the confessions and statements made by former soldiers who served on the front lines? What do you believe the Wagner Group's brutal actions are really trying to accomplish, in your opinion? We place a high value on the feedback and ideas that you share with us. Please ensure that you leave your thoughts in the comments section by not forgetting to do so.